Up your appeal.
For those hashtag moments.
Up your productivity.
So you can work faster.
Up your memories.
For more likes that everyone will love.
Up your laughter.
So everyone can get in on the fun. Revon Broadband Internet is now 33% faster with upload speeds up to 7 times faster than ever. Sign up for the fastest internet today, starting at just $19.99 a month. Rev, join the revolution.
New Zealand VAT experts say a July 1st implementation date for the new tax probably can't happen. A man shot and killed in the Wilson Track area overnight. The State Minister of National Security says convicted sex offender Randy Fraser should not lead his own church. Officials want to crack down on lewd photos shared on social media, and Cabo Bahamas donates more than $100,000 to various social groups. We've got those stories and more coming up tonight. I'm Dana Smith, and MV12 starts now. Topping news tonight, 2 value-added tax experts visiting the Bahamas from New Zealand have suggested that the proposed July 1st implementation date is not realistic, stressing a number of key details have not yet been finalized. During a 47-minute news conference out of the Ministry of Finance this afternoon, VAT consultants Don Brash and John Shewan noted that the Christie administration won't receive a VAT report until May, and it will take months for officials to conduct a comprehensive education VAT campaign. That being said, they say VAT is the least bad tax there is. Monique Toot reports.
Just over 2 months before the proposed implementation of value-added tax, 2 New Zealand VAT experts have insisted that it would be extremely difficult for the Christie administration to implement the controversial tax regime on July 1st as proposed, noting it would take months to educate the public. However, they insisted, despite mounting concerns, VAT is not a scary tax.
I think the government has indicated that it has some flexibility around timing, and I guess from that there's an inference that 1 July is not set in stone. The bottom line with these taxes is that people always want as long as possible to get the design right. Sooner or later you need to bring the helicopter in for a landing. I think 1 July would be extremely challenging.
While wrapping up the mid-year budget debate in the House of Assembly last month, Prime Minister Perry Christie hinted that VAT will not be implemented on July 1st as originally stated, and the rate would be lower than 15%. However, he has not announced a new date. New Zealand VAT experts John Shewan and Don Brash would not speculate on a more realistic date for VAT implementation, but insisted the process would likely take longer as government awaits a report from the coalition.
It's very hard for the government to actively promote the tax or explain how it works until the design features are finalised. And I think the government has been very constructive in being willing to listen to other groups. The Chambers of Commerce have commissioned a study from Oxford Economics looking at the tax and looking at alternatives to the taxes. The government's commissioned an American house to do a study as well. And if they were to announce the final shape of the package now and start educating people about it, that effectively was saying the other studies we're not going to listen to.
That, he says, will take months.
The government is very conscious of the fact that it's going to take some months for the community to get prepared for this tax, and they can't really start preparing for it seriously until the government itself has finalised the shape of it. So I think they are very much aware of that issue, want to deal with it as quickly as they can, but in a sense they can't deal with it until they accept receive the reports.
That being said, Shewan suggested that government launch a comprehensive education campaign as soon as possible. He says it's important for the Christie administration to convey the message that while no one likes taxes, VAT is not a scary tax and is in fact one of the most efficient tax systems.
It's entirely understandable that when a VAT is announced that people will feel nervous, will feel concerned. And this is people in the community, it's unions, it's church groups, it's businesses, and the concerns around pricing impact on our welfare, impact on tourism and so forth. That's entirely understandable. The key at this particular stage of the process is to make sure that all of these concerns are heard.
In making the case for the new tax regime, Brash noted that officials on New Zealand were enthusiastic about its impact on that country's economy.
No one likes taxes. I think that's a very general understanding. But we were persuaded then, and we're persuaded now, that the value-added tax is the least bad tax. And it's interesting that in the last 30 years since the VAT was introduced in New Zealand, no political party has suggested changing it.
Brash and Shewan say they will submit a draft report to the Bahamas government before they leave on Tuesday, noting that the final report will likely be submitted by May 10th. Reporting from the Ministry of Finance for NB12, I'm Vonique Toot.
There is also uncertainty over whether government intends to apply value-added tax to residential and commercial customers' electricity bills. Works Minister Philip Brave Davis had said repeatedly nothing is set in stone and a final decision would be made based on public opinion. However, Don Brash of Brash Consultancy Services says there is no way electricity should be exempt.
Absolutely not. I mean, if you exempt it, you've got... What do you do for the power company's coal supply? Do they use coal or oil? I don't know. Oil, okay. If electricity is exempt, it means that they don't claim any credit back for the oil they buy. They have a VAT on everything they buy, and they can't claim it back because the electricity itself is an exempt supply.
One of the Progressive Liberal Party's election pledges was to lower the cost of electricity to consumers. However, some people have expressed concern that placing VAT on electricity bills would have a reverse effect. Brash says he understands that.
That's precisely why you need to have in place a regime which protects low-income families. Now, high-income, I guess not true in the Bahamas. I was going to say, in New Zealand, we use a lot of electricity to heat swimming pools. You don't do that if you're a low-income family. I guess you don't have to heat swimming pools in the Bahamas. But I suspect that a high-income family will use a lot more electricity in the Bahamas than a low-income family does. So by saying exempt electricity, you give a large dollar amount to a high-income family and a small dollar amount to a low-income family. And why would you want to do that?
Officials in the Ministry of Finance have said the government could lose an estimated $30 million in revenue annually if electricity is VAT exempt. Another government minister is taking exception to opposition leader Hubert Minnis's statements regarding value-added tax. Minnis had said if any new tax introduced by the current government causes pain or stress to the Bahamian people, his party, if it were to return to office, would repeal and reverse that tax. His comments come in the midst of the government's efforts to implement value-added tax, which has been widely criticized by the private and public sectors. While State Minister of Finance Michael Halkitis said although Minnis may find it politically attractive to make such statements, tax reform is needed, and he noted VAT was devised under the prior administration.
You know, while it might be politically attractive to make such a statement, I think we have to be responsible and we have to look at the reality, because the former administration, out of the mouths of their own former ministers, said that the introduction of the VAT would have been high on their list of priorities. They got the same, basically, advice that we get, that we have to reform the system.
Minnis had said although the F&M agrees tax reform is needed, his party would get rid of any new tax introduced by the current government that proves detrimental to the country's middle and lower classes. Financial Service Minister Ryan Pinder has already said he found Minnis's comments reckless and hypocritical. Pinder had said the Christie administration is only doing what it believes is in the best interest of the Bahamas. Halkitis echoed those remarks.
The leader of the opposition might see a political advantage in making such a statement, but I think sometimes we just have to be responsible and face the reality that, look, this is not a simple thing to do, it's not an easy thing to do, it's not even an attractive thing to do. But we believe that it's the responsible thing to do and it's the right thing to do.
Police have 2 teens and 3 men in custody in connection with the shooting incident that left a 20-year-old man dead. According to police reports, last night around 9:30 p.m., the deceased was walking through Wilson Track along with another man when three men opened fire on them with a high-powered weapon. The deceased was shot several times to the upper legs. He was taken to hospital where he later succumbed to his injuries. A short time later, police arrested two 17-year-old boys, two 24-year-old men, and a 37-year-old man in connection with the incident. Two men appeared before Magistrate Andrew Forbes today, charged in connection with the seizure of 1,204 pounds of marijuana. Amal Pratt, who turned 25 years old today, and 20-year-old Randy Munnings were arrested in Long Island this past Wednesday. The men face charges of drug possession with intent to supply, drug importation, and conspiracy to commit those offenses. Both Pratt and Munnings pleaded not guilty and were remanded to Her Majesty's prisons until their next court appearance on September 9th. It remains unclear if convicted sex offender Bishop Earl Randolph Frazier will appear on a sex offenders register once it is introduced. Earlier this week, National Security Minister Dr. Bernard Nottage said the list would not be retroactive. It raises concerns among some about how safe children are in communities and even churches now that Frazier is leading another church in the Bahamas. Christina McNeil has more in this report.
Minister of State for National Security Keith Bell says there is no way Frazier should be around children. This comes after Frazier opened Palms of Victory Kingdom Ministries earlier this month after serving a 3-year prison sentence for having sex with a dependent.
Earlier this week, Nottage said government has not yet drafted the regulations needed to create a promised sexual offenders register. That register may be active before the end of this year, but there is no indication of whether sexual offenders such as Frazier would appear on that list. Bell says the Minister of National Security will ultimately use his discretion.
There is a process by which that one would have to go through. I would not necessarily want to prejudice him or the whole case surrounding that particular matter. But again, the legislation is clear in terms of a committee being formed. They would look at the entire case and then make a recommendation to the minister. And the minister would make that decision as to whether or not a person ought to go on the register.
Bell says there is no legislation in the Bahamas preventing sex offenders from being around children, but perhaps that's something government should examine. And when it comes to Frazier's case in particular, Bell says he does not think Frazier should have gone back to pastoring.
I don't think he ought to. Obviously, when you look at the holy sacraments, one of them being baptism and having to do with children, I don't know whether or not someone who was being convicted of such an offense by not just being convicted of an offense, but by virtue of the office that he holds, whether he should be allowed to return to that office. I don't think that should be the case.
Bell is not the first to speak on the issue. Dr. Victor Cooper of New Bethany Baptist Cathedral said while he believes in second chances, it may be too soon for Frazier to lead another church. Reverend Philip McPhee of Mount Calvary Baptist Church, who attended the opening of Frazier's church, added that Frazier would have done well to take more time before resuming pastoral duties. Meanwhile, amendments to the Sexual Offenses Act and the Child Protection Act were passed in the House of Assembly last year to create a sexual offenders register and a MARCO alert for missing children. That alert is similar to the United States Amber Alert. Bell says those are just some of the measures being taken to protect children.
We do have the MARCO's law, which basically encapsulates both the MARCO alert, so that if a child is missing, there is a system in place by which the alert can go out to find the child. And then secondly, the register. That is something which is actively being worked on to determine who would go on the register. And once that is done, the issue would be whether or not, given the legislation, whether they would be allowed to function and exist around children.
Bell says whether legislation in the Bahamas has gone far enough in regard to sexual offenses is another question. Reporting for NB12, I'm Christina McNeil.
There has been an alarming increase in the number of firearm-related offenses among young men, particularly those between 14 and 17 years old. That according to Magistrate Constance Delancey, chairman of the juvenile panel. Speaking to NB12, Delancey says the panel has noticed certain trends in crimes among teen boys and girls related to guns, drugs, and their behavior.
The alarming trend that I'm seeing amongst our juveniles, especially our juvenile males, is the increase in firearms-related matters. a number of our young men from the ages of 14 to 17, there is an increase in that type of offense. Primarily amongst the female offenders, juvenile offenders, it's usually causing harm or assault. We call behavioral issues.
Earlier this month, Minister of State for National Security Keith Bell revealed that 30 teen boys between 16 and 19 years old were on remand at Her Majesty's Prison for serious crimes such as murder and rape. Bell said those statistics are part of the reason his ministry is seriously considering introducing legislation to address concerns surrounding parental responsibility. Delancey indicated that the Child Protection Act has been a great help when it comes to determining the punishment for children, recognizing that although they may commit similar offenses as adults, they are still children.
It recognizes that children ought not to be treated in the same manner as adults, even though they may be charged with an adult crime. And so it gives us a wide ambit in terms of not only punishing the child for what offenses they may have committed, but it also gives us an opportunity to step in and put them back on track. So our preferred method of punishment would be probation with, say, curfew, placing them in counseling for drug addiction, anger management therapy.
Delancey was speaking on the sidelines of a child protection workshop yesterday. She says unlike the judiciary as a whole, the juvenile system typically does not have a backlog, as the aim is to get children back on track as soon as possible.
The longer we take, for instance, for a child who's been suspended from school, the harder it is for that child to get back on track. And so we take a very proactive approach. The only part that holds us up in terms of, say, having a child in the system is that because we put a child on probation, they have to come back to us at, say, 90-day intervals for a progress report to make sure that there's nothing that we need to tweak about the order or vary about the order to keep that child on track. So necessarily, we don't have those type of delays in our court.